Hey everyone, this is AKCoder and welcome back to another episode in the Learning Python series. Today we will be learning about for loops, which is another type of loops. Then we will be learning about enumeration, which is used in for loops. Let's get started! The first topic for this episode is for loops. Here's an example of a for loop. So for I in range 100, print I. So I over here is a temporary variable that keeps increasing every time the for loop repeats. You can name this temporary variable anything you want, but I is most commonly used in Python. So for is just for loops and in is just used in every single for loop. Here I said range 100. So what this does is it makes the for loop run 100 times. So if you did range 5, then the for loop will run 5 times. Here's another important fact. Python always counts starting by 0. So the temporary variables in for loops, in this case I, will always start at 0. So in this example, we're printing I. So I is going to be 100 numbers because it changes 100 times. Because as we learned here, every time the for loop repeats, I keeps on increasing. So it's going to increase 100 times. So first it starts at 0 and then it increases 100 times. So after 100 times, I will actually be 99, not 100, because I is starting from 0, not 1. 0 to 99 are still 100 numbers. Next, let's try a for loop that prints out all the contents of a list. So this is a little tricky to understand, but really easy to create. So first, let's create a sample list. So I'm just going to create a simple alphabets list. Now we have our list. So now let's use a for loop to print out the contents of this list. So for I in, and for this for loop, we're not going to use range. We're actually only going to type up the list name. So for I in alphabets. So we're going to do this because we want to print out the contents of the list, not like numbers. So to do this, we want to do for I in alphabets because now I is going through each of the contents in the list and printing them out when we do print I. So now when we run this code, it prints out A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Next, let's move on to enumeration. What is enumeration? Enumeration is a method used to count each item in an iteration. Iteration basically means taking every item of something, one after another. When you use enumeration to print out items, most commonly in a list, each item is printed one after another on different lines. Here's an example of code that uses enumeration. So we can use enumeration in a for loop. First, I created a list called values and I added a few values to that list. Since Python starts by counting with 0, like we learned before, it will start counting with 0 on the left. C is the counter, and then the items. I is the items. Enumerate is the actual function that will count, as we can see over here. So in this for loop, we said for C, I in enumerate values, and that means for counter, items in enumerate, which is the name of the function for enumeration, and then a set of regular parentheses, and then the list that we want to enumerate. Then a colon, and then print CI, the counter and the items. Now let's take a look at the output of the code that we saw previously in the PowerPoint presentation. Now let's run this code. So now I'll explain what this output is and how it works. So first it starts off with the first value, Since Python starts with counting by 0, the first value is the 0th value, so 0 test. Then the next value, which is Python, comes 1 Python. Then 2 programming. So this is basically how this enumeration works. Now I'll show you a few examples of enumeration in the repo.it project. So first, I'm going to quickly type in an enumeration for loop. There's another thing you can do with enumeration. So you can actually just put a list inside the parentheses of the enumeration for loop instead of creating a list and then putting that list name inside the parentheses. So I'll show you how that works. So first type in a set of square brackets because you need square brackets for a list. Then you can type in your values. So this will actually do the same thing as we saw before. It says 0 house and 1 barn. You might wonder why there's 2 variables in an enumeration for loop while there's only 1 in a regular for loop. Well, you can actually just do only 1 variable in an enumeration for loop, but it's just a little difference. So I'm going to copy paste the same example on the next line so that you know the difference. This time I'm just going to do for I in enumerate. And you also need to delete the C here or else it's going to give you an error. Now let's run the code. So in the first example we had 2 variables, one for the counter and one for the items. So 0 is the counter and house is the item. But for the second example we only had the 1 variable. Because of that, it put both the counter and the item in a tuple. So this is basically the difference between 2 variables and 1 variable. Thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to hit that like button and leave a comment regarding this episode so that I'll know how to make future episodes. Also, make sure to subscribe to this channel so that you'll know when future courses are released. See you in the next video!